owe it to the world to maintain your attention.
Yeah.
And part of the way that you do that is by immersing yourself in concentrated reading.
Welcome to the Russell Moore Show. This is Ashley Hales. I'm the editorial director for our print magazine, and quarterly I get to show up on Russell's show and we get to talk about books. So welcome, Russell. It's always a pleasure to talk ideas and fiction and nonfiction with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, even though I have not yet gotten a system here in my library to track where everything is. And so one of the books we're going to talk about today, I have an app. I just don't have time to actually go through and categorize the books. So I couldn't find one of the ones that we're talking about today, even though I just read it last week. But
We'll be
make
okay.
do.
You're a smart guy. I know that you'll be able to pull through, and I'm impressed I'm impressed that you have an app. We should maybe have a whole conversation about how one organizes books.
Let me tell you, I can't remember the name of the app, but somebody recommended it to me, and it uses your camera, and all you do is you pull the book out and you scan the little code, whatever that code is called, and then it immediately categorizes everything. Wow. And you just note in like where it is. So I've tried to name my shelves. I'm going to forget what names I gave to the shelves, but
I just had a conversation with my sister-in-law about my bookshelves, and she's like, how do you organize your books? I was like, well, this is what I'm interested in right now. It's not really, it's just my brain in piles. So anyway, I am really excited, though, to talk about books. I thought maybe before we just dive into the titles that you and I were reading recently, we could think about how might we think together about reading more generally in this moment in time. Obviously, we're recording this in early 2025. It feels like the news headlines are coming at us at a pace that feels dizzying at the very least, if not. The state of the world feels very fragile at the moment. Yeah. And so we can think about the project of reading, and it can feel superfluous. We know C.S. Lewis thought a lot about that in his essay, Learning in Wartime. But how can we begin to think about the importance of reading right now and why it matters?
I think it's even more important than what Lewis laid out in Learning in Wartime, although all of that is true. But we have the additional issue right now of atrophied attention for all of the reasons that you just mentioned, with things that are coming at us so constantly, which actually plays into a couple of the books that we're going to talk about right now. And you really owe it to the world to maintain your attention.
Yeah.
And part of the way that you do that is by immersing yourself in concentrated reading. I mean, one book that I'm reading right now that we're not talking about today is looking at the shift from orality to literacy and all of the differences that made in terms of the way that we even think, and is arguing that now with the the digital revolution, that we're in many ways moving back to orality. And that's not a good, it's kind of a digital orality. That's not a good thing when it comes to reflection and concentration and preservation of the things that are really important. So we owe it to the future to do that. And so I think some people, for me, what I'm trying to do right now, I read quickly, just the way I'm made, but I'm trying to at the same time read very slowly. So I've started it, put it back, but I'm rereading War and Peace, but only like 2 paragraphs at a time. which is so alien to the way I do
Yeah.
things, but just 2 paragraphs at a time, and it doesn't matter to me if it takes however long,
Yeah.
it's useful for
Hmm.
me to have a different kind of attention.
I like that. Yeah. I mean, I think again and again, we're reminded that attention keeping is really a form of loving others and loving God, right? This
Yeah.
slowing down and giving ourselves to another person, God or neighbor, is increasingly countercultural.
And it also is a it's a reminder that a lot of experiences that we think are were completely unanchored,
Hmm.
unmoored, no pun
Hmm.
intended, from everything, have been experienced before. I mean, like in that very beginning of War and Peace I'm talking about,
Hmm.
it's a dinner party where they're sitting around talking about the state of the world, about what Napoleon is doing, and how nobody knows what's going to happen, next week, in the
Yeah.
midst of kind of all these little interpersonal jealousies and envies and rivalries and
Right.
social awkwardness. I mean, it just is a reminder that there are some permanent
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
going on.
Nothing is new under the sun, as
No.
much as things are new.
Yeah.
One book, your only nonfiction book that you wanted to consider is the book Super Bloom, and you've written about it a little bit in your newsletter, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Have I? See, I don't
I
even
think you
remember
did.
writing about it.
I
Okay.
think you did.
Okay.
I ordered it because of that.
Oh, okay. All right.
I was like, that looks fantastic. Nicholas Carr, the subtitle is How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart. So the whole idea of Super Bloom for our listeners is he uses this as kind of a guiding metaphor throughout the book, right? Of these Instagram influencers who go to this part of California where these poppies that are become a super bloom based on all of the rainwater that had happened that year, and it becomes almost overrun, so that cities and towns and infrastructures are overrun by all of these kind of influencers. It becomes this both like a way to get attention as well as then you get the backlash and repercussion for the fact that they are like trampling over all of these lands, and it really kind of gives us a picture of our digital overload, right? So
Hmm.
what did you enjoy about Super Bloom? How did it help provide maybe a lens on this moment in time?
Well, Nicholas Carr wrote a previous book about what the internet, I think it's called The Deeps,
Hmm.
what the internet is doing to our minds. And this is particularly focused on this moment of
Hmm.
digital media.
Hmm.
And so I think there were several things that I stopped the book and said, "Oh yeah, that's right." I mean, one of
Hmm.
the things being about um, envy. He talks about how envy is tied up with proximity.
Hmm.
So your people are going to envy somebody who's close to them. So you don't typically get envious when some celebrity on television has a Bentley, is the
Right.
example he gives. You do if somebody next door,
Right.
unless you're discipled away from it. If somebody next door
Hmm.
has a car that's better than yours or a house that's better than yours, whatever. And he argues that what's happened with digital media is that everything has become proximate.
Hmm.
And so as he put it, social media has turned us all into rivals.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that's exactly right. I think that really gets at it. And he talks about how, with the way we're experiencing digital media right now, um, it's not, it's designed to come at you as though it's personal.
Right.
So that's the way the algorithms work. So he says, people talk about us. People are talking about you at any given point. You don't
Hmm.
know, you don't care, or don't want to know what people are thinking, but you're being sized up and envied, celebrated, shamed, and shunned
Hmm.
all the time, even if nobody's talking about you,
Right.
just because of the nature of the technology, which I thought was a really good point.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Um, the way in which smartphones, because they're in our pockets, right, are in our hands. So that is proximate. So therefore, we think that the messages that are coming through are proximate. One thing is really fascinating. He talks about just in the very beginning of the book that every new medium creates a new environment. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
that was a really thoughtful way of kind of parsing out. I think a lot of times when we think about social media, we think about smartphones, we think about technology, we can only think about them as tools. And I really liked this kind of sense of actually our tools or technologies are creating some sort of like ecosystem. They're creating an environment that we're immersed into rather than just like I'm picking up an axe and I'm going to go chop some wood or something.
Yeah, and I think immersed is the right word, and I say that not just because I'm a Baptist, but because at the same time that I'm around the same time that I'm read this book, I started this book called Digital Future in the Rearview Mirror,
Mm-hmm.
um, which talks about how um, with reading, one of the things that happened with literacy is that it enabled a person to kind of disconnect from the environment around that person in order to concentrate just on sight. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're hearing, you kind of have all of the senses going at the same time if you're sitting around the fire listening to a story. But when you're reading, it sort of shuts everything down and foregrounds that. And with digital media, he argues, we're going back to the experience of being immersed in the environment
Mm-hmm.
with multiple senses going at once. But it's a digital environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes to explain one of the reasons why um, there's so much anxiety and so much on edge
Yeah.
here. So it actually connected in a lot of ways to something that one of the books we're going to talk about later, um, what Kurt Vonnegut was saying in Slaughterhouse-Five. He was talking about soldiers who had been taught through their experiences to think with their spinal cords,
Hmm.
was the way he put it, which I thought was just such
Hmm.
an apt way to describe what happens. It's not so much what we're thinking about, it's it's deeper than that. It's
Yeah.
it's this sense of alarm.
That's fascinating. I think, a lot of the books that we are engaging with really are recovering something, that we are holistic creatures. We're not just our eyes, right? We're not brains on a
Yeah,
stick. And yet, this new digital and political world in which we live feels highly connected and limbic, like that
yeah,
everything is kind of gut, kind of reactionary
yeah,
chaos.
yeah.
Would you
Well,
say
and
that,
that's
or
and
go
that's one of the things Carr talks about. He uses
Yep.
the example of the Daisy ad,
Hmm.
which is what Lyndon Johnson, an ad that ran one time against Barry Goldwater in 1964, but it was of a little girl who is sitting there with a daisy, and she's doing, the he loves me not" thing
Hmm.
with the petals, and there's a nuclear countdown in the background. It's 8, 7, 6, and then at the end there's a mushroom cloud, and says essentially, uh,
Wow.
stop this before it happens. And the reason that ad was effective, even though it only ran one time, is that it jarred every part of you in that
Yeah.
moment. Well, now he's arguing everything's the Daisy ad,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
around us. And so it's really hard. And um, the end result of that actually I'm going to talk about in our magazine here in a little bit, the end
Hmm.
result of that is that you get deadened,
Yeah.
because when everything is at a state of alarm, you eventually sort of shut down. You don't know how to pay attention to what really is important and alarming, and
Hmm.
everything just becomes boring.
Yeah. Like the freeze, fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Just numb oneself because there's
Hmm.
just too much coming at you. What sort of window did Super Bloom and maybe some of these other books on technology really open up for you for our current cultural moment?
Well, I think one of the things is the language that Carr used of he's talking about what to do, and what I appreciated is that at the end he doesn't do this and this and this, and then you'll be okay.
Right.
He's saying that's not what's happening here. But he says, what I would say is that salvation, if that's not too strong a word, he says,
Mm-hmm.
lies in personal, willful acts of excommunication.
Hmm.
And that is first as
Hmm.
individuals and then as groups of people who are beyond the reach of its liquefying force, of digital
Wow.
media's
What
liquefying
a
force, that
sentence.
willful excommunication. And it made me think of, Peter Berger used to write about cognitive minorities
Mm-hmm.
and how if you're all by yourself,
Right.
you're going to fold eventually. You have to find um, those other people who can hold up the arms
Yep.
and create these alternative sorts of structures. And that's what I think he was getting at there.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. And to think, how can our churches or communities be those in person attention paying places for that to
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I've been thinking a lot since on this show, I had my friend Ian Cron on. He was talking about
Mm-hmm.
AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, that there's there's something like that has to be around for addicts, I say, or
Right.
addicts to 2025 life,
Right.
where people can have the kind of encounter where they're freely able to say, I don't know if I can do this. I
Yeah.
don't know if I can hold on to this. We've got to create something
Mm.
like that.
Yeah. That's good. I know Kurt Thompson, who's the neurobiologist, has
Hmm.
something called confessional communities. And, that's something that's, in person with him in his practice. But, I'm curious about that as a model.
It's an amazing thing, the way that he describes it. And I've actually talked to a couple of people who've done that with
Hmm.
him. And uh, I mean, I wish that kind of thing
Yeah.
were available all over the place because they really do get to this point of trust and being able to kind of break down the pretense and get to what's really happening.
Yeah.
And the way they describe it, it's not cheesy,
Hmm.
you know, trust fall
Right.
kind of, stuff at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can see that, right, as the antidote to some of this overly technological, information heavy world. That seems to be how we're operating in. Um, yeah. So, what you, and maybe you can even think about fiction, right, as an antidote to some of that. So, you had two novels that you wanted to discuss, Silas Marner and Fahrenheit 451. So, is this part of your project of
Not
re
Fahrenheit 451, but Slaughterhouse 5.
Slaughterhouse Five,
Yeah.
another number. Sorry. Sort of apocalyptic and a number in the title. And here we go. I'm not quite awake. But, as we think about those novels, is this part of your rereading project particularly?
No, I had never read either Silas Marner or any Kurt Vonnegut
Oh,
at
okay.
all.
Yeah.
And Slaughterhouse Five, I read it because I'm working on this project for our magazine I just mentioned,
Yep.
and a bigger project that's beyond that. Um, and so I thought I ought to at least read part of Slaughterhouse Five because I think it'll have a unique window on
Hmm.
kind of trauma response and those kinds of things. And I thought, because I'm not somebody who really likes kind of war novels
Hmm.
usually. Um, but as I was reading, I was like, why have I not read this before? This guy is hilarious for
Yeah.
one thing. He's
Yeah.
able to talk about really awful experiences in a hilarious sort of way. Um, and he's an atheist
Yeah.
who was a prisoner of war, was captured in the Battle of the Bulge and was a prisoner of war in Dresden, and that's
Hmm.
what it's named after. He was in the Slaughterhouse Five and saw all the bombing of Dresden, and it was just a unique picture. I mean, several of the things he talked about. I mean, to go back to the AA
Yeah.
issue, is he talked about the main character. has this serenity prayer that
Mm-hmm.
AA uses up on the wall. And Vonnegut says, among the things that Billy Pilgrim, is his name, Billy Pilgrim,
Mm-hmm.
among the things Billy Pilgrim could not change were the past, the present, and the future. Give me the grace for the things I can't change,
Yeah.
which I thought was a really interesting way. And there were
Yeah.
also some really interesting religious wrestlings
Yeah.
in here. So he is the book is from the perspective of somebody who is numb, as we talked about,
Yep.
by the trauma and going crazy. I mean,
Mhm.
there are space aliens that show up in
Yeah.
here. There
Yeah.
are all kinds of things that happen. Uh, but he talks about, for instance, Silent Night, and about a war veteran who would weep quietly and privately sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and he kind of was modeling what he saw as respect in chaos, which was the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes.
Hmm.
And I mean, it really, I've always hated that.
Yeah.
uh,
It is ridiculous. He's a
hated
baby.
that in that carol because of the way that the scripture uses the Abba cry. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just that as a baby crying was something that Jesus inevitably was going to do. It's that through the Spirit, he's
Right.
still doing that. We
Right.
cry
Right.
out, Abba, Father.
Yeah.
So talking about that, and he talks about crucifixion
Huh.
and about having a he had this character, at least, and
Yep.
I think it's based on Vonnegut. He had a crucifix that his mother had up in the house, and that's kind of where he learned about trauma and about suffering, was by seeing that. And he said she wasn't religious. She didn't go to church. She just bought it in a gift shop. And she was one of many Americans who are trying to
Mm.
construct a life out of things they've bought in gift shops,
Wow. What
which
a
was just
line.
a perfect way, I think, to put it.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's fascinating. I mean, and the name Billy Pilgrim, right? It's like feels like a little redo of Pilgrim's Progress, and
Yeah.
yeah, there's all this religious imagery. What did you make of that? Given the trauma of war, was religion basically a throwaway then, and just something kind of a kitschy sort of
It
object
was
one
something,
purchases?
while I was reading it, I went and I just kind of went on a little Vonnegut kick and started
Hmm.
reading his letters he was writing to people. And it seems to me that he was a convinced atheist all the way through, but he was haunted by
Yeah.
all of this. And so he's wrestling with it. And I think the way that what the book is presenting is a kind of fatalism that people adopt in order to get through life when they don't have that
Hmm.
ultimate
Hmm.
consolation. So there's one sentence that is everywhere in the book. So it goes.
Yeah.
So he'll talk about, little things of minor irritation. So it goes. And then he'll talk about genocide and mass slaughter and war crimes. So it goes.
Hmm.
So there's this sense of, this is it. You just have to live through it. But I think the book itself shows that actually doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, this is somebody who's in deep pain and actually is looking for something deeper than that.
Hmm. And there's a bit, I think, I was just in preparation for our conversation, I was looking online, and Salman Rushdie has an article in the New Yorker about reading the book, and
Oh,
seeing
I
that.
haven't seen that.
Yeah, it was from a while ago, but he kind of talks about rereading it and the way in which the "so it goes" phrase becomes this kind of ironic statement about modern life. Anyway,
Yeah,
worth a read as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
He has like I said, it goes into all of these weird sort of things
Hmm.
that when you're reading it, it kind of makes sense because you never know whether this character's going crazy.
Right.
I mean, obviously he is, but one of the things that he does is he goes in a time machine. And he can go anywhere in what's probably a delusion, but he can
Right.
go anywhere. Where he wanted to go was to the crucifixion of Jesus.
Hmm.
and he wanted to bring a stethoscope so that he could see whether or not Jesus had really died. And what he says is there wasn't a sound inside the emaciated chest cavity. The Son of God was dead as a doornail. So it goes.
Wow.
And then he went on to say that the real scandal, when he comes back with all of this, the scandal is not for American people now, not that Jesus was crucified, nor that he was raised from the dead, but that Billy Pilgrim measured him and he's 5'3". And I thought about Isaiah 53,
Yeah.
and there was nothing about him that was externally impressive. That's kind of
Mm.
what he's getting
Yeah.
at there,
Yeah.
is that there's this sort of imaginary Jesus that we can create,
Yeah.
in such a way that we would actually be scandalized if we really understand what it means to be a Galilean carpenter who's crucified by Rome.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
think he explained that in such
Mhm.
an atheistic sort of way, but that really got at something true.
Right. That we tend to sanitize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or all those pictures of Jesus as, hulking muscle man kind of
Yeah.
thing, right? And yeah.
And speaking of that, I mean, with atheists
Hmm.
and the scandal of all of this, you mentioned that you've been reading Molly Worthen's book,
Yes.
Spellbound, I think the name of
Yep.
it is, which I need to get.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to know what you thought of the book, about her journey from.
Yeah. Well, it's more of her, she has kind of her historian hat on,
Uh-huh.
rather than kind of her memoirist hat. Molly Worthen, for folks who don't know, is a prominent historian, but then she also has very publicly converted to Christianity in the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, um, in really profound ways. And so this book, though, is really a study of charisma and how it shaped American history from the Puritans
Hmm.
through to Donald Trump. And it's just fascinating. I haven't made my way all the way through it because it's several hundred pages, but she really kind of lays out this, she does a lot of word study, right? The idea of charisma comes from charis, right, in the Greek, which
Hmm.
we as Christians just think about in terms of grace, right? As this gift given outside of ourselves to us, right? And particularly as we think about salvation and how Paul uses it in his letters. But she talks about the way in which charisma is, even before that, with the kind of gods, that there was something more sinister too in this idea
Hmm.
of charisma, that it could be a way to control or manipulate, and that it could also be something that outsiders use to kind of get positions of power, right? If you don't have kind of the mechanistic or institutional authority, what do? You can kind of
Hmm.
always appeal to charisma. And so it's just a fascinating kind of study on how that works, what that looks like, and that there is this particular American flavor of charisma and the way in which it kind of goes against some of our institutional or class based ways of thinking. And I think there's a lot of good questions for Christians too. How do we, in what ways are we, using charisma for authority? We have had that with a lot of celebrity pastors falling or what have you. But how do we trust it? Do we not trust it? How do we
Hmm.
how do we trust experiences outside of ourselves? So I think it's going to be a really fascinating read as I continue to finish it. She says this, at one point. She says, that the second she talks about various paradoxes of charisma, and she says that the history of charisma in America has unfolded as a call and response between the fire and the dove, and that these
Hmm.
have alternated with an age of institution builders and the conquerors and the experts. And so that there is a paradox of charisma, is that humans want a sense of control and the security of submission at the same time, and that charisma is something that actually delivers that,
Hmm.
as well as as America has become a more secular and scientific society, it's risen in cultural status, and therefore the human impulse to prefer a meaningful and comforting story over inconvenient facts has persisted,
Hmm.
which is just fascinating as we think about how news is told these days and who gets to tell what story.
It makes me think of something that Tim Keller used to say often, that there has to be both institution
Yeah.
and movement.
Yep. Yep.
And that if you have movement without institution, you have instability and
Right.
demagoguery and,
Right.
and all of that. And if you have institution without movement, you have deadness and sclerosis and so forth, which is, I mean,
Yep.
that's that's Book of Acts.
Yep.
That's what and what Paul talks about at the beginning of Galatians. He's coming out of nowhere,
Yeah.
and given this call, and nobody appointed me, nobody.
Right. Yeah.
But then he goes to Jerusalem and is
Right.
interacting with the ones who seem to be pillars that Jesus
Yep.
had appointed, and you've got those things coming together.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Does she talk about Pentecostalism or
Yeah,
charismatic movement?
a little bit for sure. It's fascinating. The beginning of the book, she kind of has something Anne Hutchinson from the
Oh
1600s
yeah.
that, so she has um, an amount of things. But there is little bits and pieces of Pentecostalism, although I think she's mainly thinking of charisma less as a theological sort of concept and more in terms of how we imbue authority from kind of those sorts of charismatic leaders.
My great grandmother, who lived to 105, I think, uh,
That's impressive.
wanted one year for Christmas in her. She was probably 100,
Mm-hmm.
but she wanted a dictionary with the word charisma in it. And we were like, what? And it was because that was a word she saw as new.
Okay.
And so she wanted an up to date dictionary, and that was how she would know.
That is
It had
so
the word
funny.
charisma.
I will have to say, so there is like a Gen Alpha, or Gen Z. I think it's Gen Alpha because it's my younger kids who now even make fun of the word, but the whole like Riz is,
Oh, yeah.
we got
Yeah.
Riz, it's charisma.
Yeah.
So who knows? Molly Worthen might have something to say to the young people these days.
Maybe.
Yeah. So you also read Silas Marner, which was, so you were saying that's also a new book to you. Why'd you pick
Yeah.
it up in this moment in time?
Well, I was thinking about rereading Middlemarch, and I started it, and then I thought, I've not read Silas Marner, and I need to do that. Um, and it actually was one that I was kind of going to read slowly, but it's not that kind of book.
Right.
It takes you in and carries you through, and it's so different. I mean, the thing about George Eliot is, don't hate me, people, for this. I just do not like Jane Austen
That's okay.
and that whole era of.
Yeah.
I mean, it just does not appeal to me at all. But George Eliot is so different from that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
She
and
is.
I found this story because what it's about is a guy who goes into what we would now know as kind of a seizure,
Mm-hmm.
neurological sort of seizure. And he's in this really strict Calvinistic Baptist community in England. Um, and he ends up being accused of stealing, and the way they determine whether or not he was guilty is by lots, casting
Mm-hmm.
lots, and they determine he is guilty. So he's exiled. So he goes to this little community that was in the city. He goes to this little community in the countryside, um, where nobody associates with him. He's a stranger. He's a weaver.
Mm-hmm.
So he's making cloth and making things all day long and earning money, and the money becomes for him what he loves. That's what he kind of puts the coins out.
Mm-hmm.
I thought of Ebenezer McDuck, from the
Yeah.
old cartoons, rolling around in the gold. It was
Yep.
kind of like that. But he has that stolen from him,
Hmm.
And in the midst of it all, there comes this little orphan girl into his life that he has to take care of, and he becomes then dependent on the rest of the community,
Hmm.
even though he does not understand this Anglican parish
Mm-hmm.
that he's in. The religion is so different, and the people there starts to become a genuine connection
Hmm.
that's rooted in that dependence that he
Hmm.
has, and you can sort of see him coming back to life little by little. And you
Hmm.
can also see how I think the word trauma would be appropriate here, of that rigidly, really Calvinistic sort of background, was because he doesn't trust anything. He's kind of suspicious, and she talks about the way that assurance of salvation
Mm-hmm.
was such a terror to the people in that community, because you're constantly wondering, am I one of the elect? Is
Right.
is my fruit showing that I am? And that kind of goes with him
Hmm.
through the rest of the story. But it was a painful book in some ways, but it was a beautiful book,
Hmm.
and I was really glad that I picked it up.
Was there, thinking about, as you mentioned, this kind of coming back to life into the community, were there any parallels you could see in some of our kind of either algorithmically sorted or other tribal ways of living today?
Well, yeah, because one of the things that you see there is that he's essentially. She even talks about the fact that he is becoming a machine.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he's using this machine that he's
Mm-hmm.
weaving with, that is part of what repulses the rest of the community from him, because it's the sound of it is just really uh, different, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not what they're accustomed to. But he starts to become machine like,
Hmm.
and as he becomes a hoarder of all of this gold, he started to become like that
Hmm.
too, just a dead possession, which obviously I think is probably rooted in, I mean, George Eliot was not an Orthodox Christian, but she did know it. She
Right.
did know. So I think it's rooted in the sense of you become like your
Right.
idols, those who
Yeah.
who make them become like them. That's what happened. And I mean, I think it also was striking that he couldn't work his way out of it.
Hmm.
The way that the way that he actually comes back to life is the fact that, I mean, can you imagine? You've got this toddler child who shows up that you've got to take care of while you're weaving all day.
Mm-hmm.
It's just you by yourself. He's
Mm-hmm.
tying the baby to the loom with
Right.
a cord so that she won't go very far. So he has to become dependent on the
Right.
people in the community, and they, seeing his dependence and his vulnerability,
Hmm.
they start to see him as a human being and not as just the
The
weird guy on
machine.
the end
Yeah.
of town. Um, and yeah, I mean, if you think about the way that a lot of forces in Western life right now, digital media being one of them, really does kind of silo us all out
Mm-hmm.
with this vision of invulnerability,
Right.
that you have to sort of armor up
Yep.
to do this. And security has to be what you can lay out in front of you. That when that is gone, guy loses his community, he loses his reputation, then he loses his money. It's he's losing his life in order to find it.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, I think there's a lot there that we
Mm-hmm.
we should think about.
Yes. Take heed. Yeah, that sounds, I haven't read that one, yeah, of Eliot's. I usually, yeah, we go for Middlemarch or some of the bigger social novels, but
There's
yeah.
also, I think, a thing that's really interesting about the way she is showing the development that happens with him, and that he doesn't know it's going on.
That's
So
good.
she says, for instance, our consciousness rarely registers the beginning of a growth within us. There are many circulations of the sap, before we detect the smallest sign of the bud.
That's good. That's a good
And
line.
that's that's the way that it works.
Right. We're not very conscious, or of ourselves in
Yeah.
both on our growth and probably our degeneration. Either way, uh, until it becomes, we hit those kind of crisis moments. Yeah.
And one of the things too is at the end of the book, um, the Calvinistic sect that he was part of called Lantern Yard
Mm-hmm.
in this city, he ultimately wants to go back. And the reason he wants to go back is he's sort of figured out what happened and who framed him and all of these things before. He wants to go back. He wants to explain it to them. And I mean, these are the days when you can't just get on a train or drive a
Right.
car. It's a rigorous sort of journey to get there. So he gets there after 30 years. There's nothing there. It's a
Oh,
factory
wow.
now, and
Wow.
all the people are gone. And this village woman in Ravello, where he is, very uneducated woman, but she says something like, just because you can't be seen to be right doesn't mean there's no such thing as right. So essentially to say, don't seek to vindicate yourself when all of that is gone. There's something
Wow.
bigger and more transcendent there, which, I think there are a lot of people who spend their entire lives trying to vindicate themselves to people who are no longer there.
Yeah.
Maybe they're there in a physical sense, but
Right.
they're sort of living out of, how can I prove that I'm
Prove
in the
myself. Yep.
right in this
Mm-hmm.
area, and it ultimately comes to nothing,
Right.
because there is no vindication that's good enough.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Coming back to, the cry of the baby, right? Too, that all we have is really to cast ourselves on the mercy of God to be able to vindicate us, right?
Yeah.
Because you're right. Otherwise, we're just like performing for people who, one, probably don't care.
Yeah. And also, I think about New Testament scholar Richard Hayes, who died just a little bit ago. He wrote something that stays with me. It's been years ago, stays with me all the time, about the 40 days between the resurrection and the ascension. The fact that Jesus did not appear to Caesar or to Pontius Pilate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which does not make sense if you're writing some sort of heroic epic.
Yep. Yep.
You would show up with Pontius Pilate and say, "How do you like me now?"
Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Instead, Acts 1, he presented himself alive to them, to the disciples, and to the 500. Because he wasn't seeking that kind of vindication. He was entrusting himself, as the Apostle Peter says, entrusting himself to the one who judges justly.
Yeah.
And so should we. But that's hard to do.
Oh,
And I mean, and if you go back to the social media aspect of it, the digital media aspect of it, it's even more hard to do when kind of the whole ecosystem around you causes you to want to justify yourself.
Right. Yep.
At every point, even if it's just, I'm happy.
Right. Or I just really want you to understand,
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to make sure everyone understands, right?
And that's a good impulse.
Yeah, it is.
Like everything, like a lot of other things, it's a good impulse. It just gets redirected.
For sure. Becomes yet another idol to worship.
Yeah.
Instead of hands off. Well, another book that I read that really ties in well is a book called The Theological Imagination. It's based on a series of lectures Judith Wolf gave. She's a professor at St. Andrews in like philosophical theology and the arts, or something very fun and interdisciplinary. But in this kind of series of lectures, she talks about this.
There are many people listening to this who have never thought of very fun and interdisciplinary. I just wanted that to be noted.
I know, I'm sorry. You need a new co-host here. It's so nerdy, but it's good. I promise. And it will have application to everyday life. But she does talk. She has this great line, and it feels very scriptural. And so I just wanted to read it. She talks about how the imagination, and this goes back to, we don't really even recognize our own growth, right? We don't understand how it's all happening. We don't understand the process. But she talks about the imagination as helping us to tell a better story. And Molly Worthen talks in Spellbound too about where we've failed institutionally is because we failed to tell a good story. But in Judith Wolf's book on the theological imagination, she says something like, the imagination is always working and we're not really even aware of it. And what it does is it helps create meaning. Like, we help construct meaning so we can figure out, okay, I had that weird conversation with that person. How do I fit that into like my concept of myself or my concept of our community? And we're always constantly doing this and we're not really even aware of it. And she says this, particularly as it relates to God and the theological imagination. She says this. She says, to realize this kind of imaginative capacity, it also requires a deep faith in a God whom we cannot grasp and take full hold of, a God who is not simply available and who does not simply enable the fulfillment of our ambitions, though he does hold out the gift of eternal life. Such faith engenders, among other things, a self-abnegating theological imagination. And then she says this allows us to construct kind of accounts of the world. It constructs theories and images to guide us. And here's where it gets really beautiful. But they are light, tentative, humble, because when we construct theologically, we are not building towers. We are building boats, and we trust the sea.
Wow, that's a great image.
Isn't that just beautiful? Instead of building kind of our Tower of Babel, right? We're building boats, and that we trust ourselves to the sea, to God who directs our paths. So she has some nice lines in there, and then a whole lot of philosophical jargon for the nerdy types who are listening. But otherwise, there are some beautiful moments, I think, in the book to begin to think about. I guess here's my question. My question is, given this moment in time in the American church, particularly, how have we lost our first love so thoroughly that our imaginations have really become captured by other loves? And what does it look like to build a more healthy, robust Christian imagination in this day and age? So I'm curious. I will weed through the philosophical jargon to get a few lines like that.
Yeah. It kind of it really ties in with several of the things that we've talked about on this episode today, because I think about what Carr talked about with willful excommunication.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things with Silas Marner is he recognizes that she uses the language of, he's been disinherited by the religious imagination that was formed in his past. And that's it keeps him from being able to have the very thing that's going to change him and save him. And it seems that if you think about what we're talking about here, when Jesus is speaking through John to the 7 churches of Asia Minor, a lot of it is wake up, recognize, strengthen what remains and is about to die.
Yeah.
Is a word that I think the primary thing that we need right now is not do this. And I think that's what everybody wants, is what's the game plan to go back. That's not how this works. What works is instead to see the wreckage, to groan with the Spirit along with it, and then to dependently entrust yourselves to a Father who can change things. That's just so completely opposite from anything that we want naturally.
Yeah. Give me the game plan. Give me the hero who shows up right in the halls of power, the charismatic leader. Yeah.
Yeah. Or
to
even, I mean, you think about even the kind of the language that we use, that I've used about, where are the grown-ups?
right.
Because there's this sense that the grown-ups are going to show up to deal with the craziness,
Hmm.
which is a reasonable expectation in
Right.
normal life. But then what do you do when you look around and there are no grown-ups
Yeah.
and there is no king in Israel and every man is doing what is right in his own eyes? Um, you cry out. I mean, Josiah finds is
Yeah.
given the law that's found and rediscovered. You rip your
Yep.
clothes and seek God.
Yep. That's all we can do. Hmm. Well, it's really beautiful to just be reminded and encouraged, and and so encouraging to know that, yeah, the books that we read, even apart from the Bible, have such profound effects on the way in which we care and think and process the world around us. Yeah,
And
it's just,
I
yeah.
think too, the things that we experience often drive us back to the Bible uh, in a way that doesn't add to the
Mm,
meaning of the Bible, but it enables us to see things, to ask questions of it that we weren't
mm,
asking before.
mm-hmm,
And so, I mean, I've been spending a lot of time recently in the book of Daniel.
mm-hmm.
Um, Initially, just because I'm teaching through Revelation at my church, and Revelation and Daniel are so interdisciplinary and fun.
Sorry.
But the, and so I was going back to the book of Daniel, but I was really struck by, because most people really like the first half of Daniel.
Right.
They can understand that
It's a
and
nice
relate to it.
narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, and then get just, what do we do with the last half that just seems so complicated? And I've been really drawn to that last half of Daniel
Mm,
recently, because you get to Daniel sort of describing what is going to happen in this time of the abomination of the desolations, and these things that are coming. And the text says, there will be some who are wise, who will see what's happening. They will stumble, they will fall, and they will get a little help. A little help. But then
yeah.
at the end, he says, seal these words up. And Daniel says, well, what then?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, the book says, um, don't worry about it. You're
Yeah.
gonna be standing at the end
Yeah.
of it, but you seal this up for the people who will need to know it when the time is right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's a lot of what we're doing in all of our separate callings right now are for situations that we can't imagine now, and people we may never see or know.
Yeah. Yeah.
To go back to George Eliot, to that ending of
Yeah.
Middlemarch, with
Right.
how many lives have changed by those who are now in unvisited graves,
Yeah.
you know.
So we keep on, we strengthen what remains.
Yeah.
We entrust ourselves to the sea of God's love. It's good. Good word. Well, thank you, Russell. It's always so fun to open up books with you. And we hope, listeners, that you will make sure you subscribe to the podcast, as well as you can send us your desert island book list. We'd love to hear what you're reading as well. You can email us at questions@russellmoore.com.